access to that path you take is another thing entirely, but it's always better to have options, and you really get a feeling of accomplishment if you don't take what seems like the intended route, even if that actually might be there on purpose.
When it was only available on the Ouya, so it's exciting to see it released on Steam, not only because it's a good game, getting the exposure it deserves, but also it means I can play it without using my friend's Ouya.
Mic and medleys, as well as the option to change the difficulty that you play the game in. Ultimate Party has, ironically, taken away most of the party features.
Hello and welcome to Worldwide Gaming. I'm your host Ryan. Today, Jarryd is reviewing the puzzle platformer DeadCore. Xavier is taking us through the quacktastic duck game. And Naomi is taking a look back at the Singstar series and exploring why the newest iteration got it so wrong. All that and more after the forecast.
The next Hitman game is on the way. We'll have more open levels than Hitman Absolution, closer to those found in Blood Money. The new game will task players with completing contracts all over the world. It is releasing on PC and current-gen consoles on March 11th next year. A sandbox RPG with a unique terraforming mechanic. In Isle, you create your own world and must defend it from the shadows. With a slew of different elements and many different types of islands to be combined, Isle looks like it'll be a huge game when it releases on PC and current-gen consoles in the near future. Starfall Tactics is an upcoming space RTS game from developers Snowforged Entertainment. The game will feature tactical combat, in-depth customization, and a persistent game world where the three factions battle for galactic conquest. It is releasing late next year for PC.
First-person platformers aren't typically well received and often get overlooked owing to the relative difficulty of jumping through environments from a first-person perspective. Good titles like Portal and Mirror's Edge are few and far between, and both those franchises are backed by companies that already have a lot of experience making games from the first-person perspective. Has French developer 5-Bits Games managed to add to the ranks of good first-person platformers with their debut title? DeadCore's story never reaches the lofty heights of a title like Portal, but it gives you enough reason to do what you're doing. You've fallen through a powerful magnetic storm and you've awoken in a vaguely Tron-inspired world with your memory erased. Because you're going to go forward and find out what's at the end, even if the whole thing is a little vague. There's logs scattered throughout the world for anyone who wants a bit more depth to find, and they can make for an additional incentive to explore, but it's really not necessary and should be treated as a side quest for those who are interested. The game hits a lot of familiar beats for a first-person platformer, with some pretty common mechanics at its core. Right off the bat you get access to a double jump, and a little later you'll add a dash to your repertoire. These abilities are a mainstay of platformers both 2D and 3D, and each mechanic you add to your pool changes how you'll accomplish objectives within the game. Fairly early on you'll also be given a switch gun, which, you guessed it, toggles switches for you. While this sounds pretty tame, it really opens up the scope of the puzzles when everything is combined. Dash, double jump, toggle a switch, double jump again, and so on. One thing in particular I like about DeadCore's gameplay is that, like Mirror's Edge, there's always another way to accomplish puzzles. Whether the game actually intended for you to have access to that path you take is another thing entirely, but it's always better to have options, and you really get a feeling of accomplishment if you don't take what seems like the intended route, even if that actually might be there on purpose. DeadCore's difficulty parallels many platformers. It reels you in with its relatively simplistic routes in the beginning, and ramps up the difficulty by progressively adding in extra challenges like turrets or cubes that seem to want to hug you, repeatedly. So while it is definitely difficult the first time around, it doesn't mean it's impossible. Be warned though, without guidance, you better be prepared to die. The enemies the game introduces are fairly interesting, and while what they do attacks-wise is nothing unique, I do like the fact that they don't actually hurt or kill you, they're just there to hinder you by pushing you in a certain direction. Yes, when you fall off a block or ledge repeatedly due to them, it does get rather infuriating, but that's exactly their intended purpose, and it does kind of break up the monotony of just platforming by forcing you to actually think ahead and disable them before they disable you. DeadCore controls like you would expect from a first-person shooter. Controls are relatively tight and jumping is rather floaty and allows you to change direction in the air, which helps make the platforming a lot more forgiving than other titles. I never once felt like I was cheated due to controls being subpar. However, I did have one issue which is entirely my fault. Being the compulsive reloader I am, I may have reset my progress more than a couple of times by accident. Using the R key for reset makes sense on a number of levels, but if you're in the habit of tapping R after shooting a target, you're going to get frustrated with yourself very quickly. I remapped reset to another button, and after that the controls were perfect. DeadCore is a great looking game with futuristic looking platforms and guns coupled with the almost organic atmosphere surrounding the world. They've done a fantastic job of making a seemingly empty world feel almost alive, even if that life is really only flying cubes being a nuisance. There is a distinct lack of depth perception which I can't fault the game for, as that's one of the issues that first person platformers deal with. It's not really something that's going to be solved until games like this take full advantage of VR, and I don't really see that happening for a while yet. It does make things a little more difficult than they should be, but you'll get used to it after you spend a bit of time with the game. During my first playthrough, I was much more focused on completing the task ahead, and didn't take much notice of the soundtrack, but on a revisitation to some levels, I found the soundtrack goes hand in hand with the aesthetic of the game, further contributing to the feel of a living world. With a combination of ambient and drum and bass, Arno Noble's work almost feels underappreciated, as the music doesn't seem to cut through as well as it could, but I would definitely recommend checking it out if dark drum and bass is your kind of thing. DeadCore is a speedrunner's dream. There is a ridiculous amount of things you can do to optimize your time, from simple jumps that you won't see your first time through, to flat out breaking the game and travelling outside of the established path. If you're the kind of gamer who enjoys bending a game to your will, there's going to be a lot of fun to be had here. I've watched a number of YouTubers who have quite frankly made my eyes bleed with their ability to run through levels without pause, and there's also plenty of bragging rights in the form of leaderboards if that's something you're interested in. While DeadCore doesn't ever reach the heights of games like Portal or Mirror's Edge, what it is a challenging game that I would recommend purely for the experience. It's not over the top hard, but it doesn't hold your hand either. Additionally, it's a phenomenal looking game that was probably largely overlooked when it came out due to its first person platforming nature. I can say with some confidence that it plays well, and speedrunners will have a blast with it.